Robert Mitchell looked lovingly at his 6-year-old son, who was playing in the sandbox near the house. Time flies so quickly. It seems that just yesterday Luke was so tiny. And now he can already take a shower on his own and make his own bed, the man thought. Fate was very cruel to Robert, depriving him of his beloved wife on the very day when she first became a mother. The fact was that Linda Mitchell died from extensive internal bleeding, caused by a complication after the premature birth of her son. Despite the fact that the doctors did everything they could, the young woman couldn't be saved. Upon learning of the death of his wife, Robert Mitchell felt unbearable mental anguish, which turned his life into a living hell for months. The only salvation for the young widower was his newborn son, Luke, who was born prematurely and was thus very weak. Frankly, many of the doctors didn't even believe that the boy would survive. Nevertheless, they did everything possible to ensure that Luke had a fighting chance. Apparently, this time fate decided to spare Robert, who had just lost his wife, and wouldn't have been able to recover if he had lost his son too. Fortunately, despite the skeptical prognosis of the doctors, Luke's condition stabilized, and after about 3 weeks at the hospital, the boy went home with his father. Finally taking his son home, Robert couldn't hold back his tears. Little Luke had the same eyes as his mother, whom Robert loved deeply. Needless to say, the young widower and his newborn son had to go through a lot before they got used to their new life together. Robert learned how to swaddle the baby, mix baby formula, and of course, how to bathe him. The man grew up in an orphanage and knew nothing of his parents. Therefore, there was simply no one to help him out. Since Robert had to work hard to provide for his son, he had to resort to using the services of a nanny. At first, Robert's neighbors and acquaintances didn't believe that he'd be able to raise his son alone. But time passed, and the young widower was full of optimism and energy. The first thing that upset Robert was the delay in the development of his young son. The thing was that by the age of 6, Luke still couldn't speak. The most surprising thing was that the doctors couldn't find any problems with the boy's speech apparatus, so his inability to speak was most likely caused by a developmental delay. Trying not to get too upset over it, Robert did his best to help his son overcome the inner barrier that prevented him from speaking. For this purpose, the young father played educational games and watched educational programs with Luke. In the meantime, the father and son had learned to understand each other without words. Sometimes, one glance was enough for Luke to express his gratitude to his father or convey a request. And now, when Robert decided to take his son to the mall, he read sincere approval in Luke's eyes. "So, Luke, are you ready to go? We need to get you some new clothes today. Fall is coming, and you only have summer clothes," the young father said. The boy smiled happily, nodding his head in response. The fact was that Luke really enjoyed his trips to the mall very much, and often hinted it to his father about it as best he could. This trip was no exception. Luke was very excited to get into the old Chevrolet to go to the mall, looking out the window during the entire drive. He loved the neon signs of shops and all the billboards. The boy lived in the suburbs, and so the city seemed like a truly magical place for him. Robert looked at Luke with undisguised tenderness and smiled. The man liked to spoil his son, whom the evil fate deprived of motherly love. Finally, the shopping mall appeared ahead. It was truly huge, and despite the time of day, it was glowing with multicolored lights, like a Christmas tree. Having approached the building, Robert slowed down and parked his car in an empty parking space. Everything inside the mall was as usual. There were crowds of people who spared no time or money going back and forth between the shops in search of the perfect purchase. With eyes wide open, Luke stared at the windows of the shops and boutiques selling clothes from world-famous brands. At some point, Robert lost sight of his son when Luke went over to the claw machine, which was almost half filled with plush toys. For $1, anyone could try their luck. Placing money in the receiver launched the mechanism for pulling out the toys. In addition to Luke, there were several other people standing by the claw machine. One of them was a student named April Morris. The young woman was in her senior year of the university, studying to be a teacher. She loved children more than anything else in the world. Seeing Luke's interest in the toys, April pulled $1 out of her pocket and dropped it into the receiver. The device immediately came to life and lit up with rainbow lighting. Thus, the mechanism launched, and in less than a minute, April was holding a small teddy bear with a scarlet bow around its neck. The young woman looked at her prize with a smile and then handed it to Luke. "Here you go. Take it. It's yours now." At that moment, Robert found his son at the claw machine. But choosing not to distract him, the man quietly stood behind Luke, thus getting to witness the touching interaction between the young woman and his son. Taking the teddy bear, Luke lowered his eyes in embarrassment and then quietly said, "Thank you, ma'am." At first, Robert thought that he must have imagined it. But when his son said it again, the man almost fainted. The father's surprise and excitement were caused by the fact that those were the first words that his son has ever spoken. He hasn't uttered a single word in 6 years. Tears welled up in Robert's eyes when he saw his son hug the teddy bear. April looked at the strange man in surprise and was about to leave when Robert gently touched her arm. "I wanted to thank you, miss. You've made a real miracle happen," the man said tearfully. "Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Don't worry about it. I love children and always babysit my cousin's babies. So I understand kiddos well," April replied with a smile. Robert looked at the young woman standing in front of him and felt a strange feeling arise in his soul. He really liked her. The beautiful stranger could leave at any moment, but Robert couldn't let that happen. Thus, the man pulled himself together and, having plucked up his courage, suggested, "How about we go to a cafe? There's one nearby. We could get coffee or some ice cream." To Robert's relief, April was happy to accept his invitation. Soon, the three of them were sitting in the cafe and enjoying delicious vanilla ice cream. Unbeknownst to themselves, the young people started talking and felt a strong mutual attraction. As it turned out a little later, April came to Boston from a small town, lost in northern Ohio. The woman's parents were poor farmers, whose financial well-being was noticeably undermined by a series of crop failures caused by an unprecedented drought. Ever since childhood, April wanted to become a teacher, and therefore, after graduating from high school, she decided to pursue her dream. April's teachers were crazy about the talented student who had an innate gift for teaching. Seeing the boy standing by the claw machine, April experienced a nagging feeling that bordered on pity. The woman immediately felt the sadness in Luke's eyes, which was simply impossible to hide. It was then that April decided to do something nice for the boy, which was supposed to cheer him up and make him smile. But when the woman learned Luke's story, she understood why he seemed so sad. April looked at Robert with undisguised admiration. She found it truly admirable that the man didn't break down after his wife's death and decided to raise his son alone. God, he's so young and already a widower. And his son is so cute, April thought sadly. Meanwhile, Luke was so happy that he couldn't stop talking. He liked April's teddy bear so much that he seemed to be trying to say out loud everything that he couldn't say for the last 6 long years. "Will you come visit us? We live next to the store. You know, the one with the red roof, like the house from a fairy tale?" Luke asked, looking hopefully at the young woman. April and Robert exchanged meaningful glances and, without saying a word, started laughing together. "Of course I'll come visit you. You have my word," April replied. The fact was that she really liked both the father and the son, who, despite having a rather difficult life, were radiating joy and kindness. April kept her word and came to visit Robert and Luke the very next day. She even brought another toy for the boy, who was impatiently waiting for her arrival. Seeing April at the door of his house, Robert felt something in his heart, a feeling he would never get to experience again. That evening went great. The young people had a barbecue in the backyard, drank chilled drinks, and chatted about everything in the world. Meanwhile, Luke kept cheerfully running around them and singing some uncomplicated children's song. The first date of the young couple was followed by a second one, and then a third. To Luke's delight, April and Robert didn't even seem to realize how they started living together. 6 months later, they held a small wedding ceremony. Now, there was a woman in Robert's life once again. A woman who didn't just love him, but also loved his little son just as much as he did. Robert was sure that his late wife was watching him from heaven and rejoicing in his family happiness.